All right, today is May the 6th, Wednesday, 2009, and we're here for the 6th session with Jim Miller in his home in Louisville, Kentucky. I want to take just a couple of minutes and try to catch us to where we're wanting to go today, because I think this is a very important discussion on the championship of 1978. The Thoroughbreds first competed on the international stage in 1959. And by 1962 had won the international championship competition for the first time. Since the champion wins and sits out 2 years, the next time that the Thoroughbreds were eligible was in 1965, and they lost by 1 point to the course from Miami. So in 1966, the Thoroughbreds came back and won their second championship. In 1969 was again a historic moment when the Thoroughbreds won their third championship with an unheard of score, which was 300 or 400 points ahead of the second place course. That championship opened the door for the society to begin to take serious note of what the Thoroughbreds were doing that was unique and different, so that the society could benefit from where the Thoroughbreds had gotten. By 1974, the course was in competition again for their fourth championship, which was won, putting the Thoroughbreds in the unique position of having won more championships than any course in the society's history. At that 1974 championship, there was an emerging course in Dallas, Texas called the Vocal Majority, directed by Jim Clancy. They finished third in that competition, but the talk was already that this was the course that was going to challenge the Thoroughbreds and be for the Thoroughbreds a very viable competitor in the years to come. True enough, in 1975, Dallas did win their first championship, and the Thoroughbreds in 1977 finished second in that competition, which set up in 1978 the really extraordinary event of having the Thoroughbreds, four-time champions, meeting the reigning international champion from 1975, the Vocal Majority, in Cincinnati, Ohio. So from a historical standpoint, the society was almost at its midpoint in its history, and you had the traditional course of the Thoroughbreds, the all-time champion, meeting the young grunt bunch from Dallas, who were primed to go on to win successive championships in the years that followed '78. But for this moment on the stage, these two giants met, and it was the equivalent of undefeated champions meeting in a heavyweight fight, or two Super Bowl champions meeting, or Federer and Nadal, and that type of thing, that atmosphere. So I want to begin there today with Jim, and he can correct anything that I've maybe missaid here, but I think it's very important that we get on record his memory of that time, what led up to the '78 championship, and any thoughts that he had about that moment, which I consider to be the single most important event from a historical standpoint in the history of the society. So Jim, I hope I haven't labored over that too far, but what was it like in 1978 as you all prepared for that championship, knowing that you were going to face Dallas, and that you were in a situation where this was not just an ordinary competition? This was going to be something that was much bigger, on a bigger stage than maybe you had experienced prior to.
Well, you got your finger pretty much right on the pulse of things there. From a leadership standpoint, we were aware, of course, that we were going to be going up against the Vocal Majority, and we felt that there were certain things that we were going to have to do better, and there were things, but we never allowed that to really become a factor with the troops. We tried to make it a situation of it's just another contest and you had to do your best, as you did in all the rest of them. We I don't know whether that was the best thing to do or not. It so happened that we did win the contest and everything, but that was the approach. The leadership was very much aware of what we were going up with, and I believe that we did have some differences in our approach from a leadership standpoint. But as far as the external look to the chorus itself, we pretty much tried to keep it the same. I think a point that should be noted here is that one of the greatest advantages that the Thoroughbreds always had was what I called was internal leadership. The guys that were standing up on those risers up there that actually took things into their own hands and gave a great amount of leadership. Generally with a new man coming in or with just being around, they'd work with him on basically on philosophy of the way things were, anything to get the best effort out of me. But there was one situation that took place prior to that contest that was unique, and I think it was extremely important. You know, there's an old statement, you hear real estate people get together and they say that there's three things that are important. They say it's location, location, and location. Well, in this barbershop thing, there's also the same thing that you can say is that the three most important things are attendance, attendance, and attendance. And having a volunteer organization, you can understand that there's things that, you know, that can come up. And you recognize those kind of things. The things you have to fight is the casual absenteeism. The casual guy that decided, well, it's a little tough out there tonight and I had a tough day at the office and they got a pretty nice ball game on and I think I'll just sit here tonight. That's the guy you really had to worry about. Not that we had a whole lot of that, but it was there in certain cases. And the thing that came about is that the music team could shriek and holler all they wanted to about attendance and everything, and it would only go so far. But there was a guy by the name of Herb Humphreys. He was I don't know before or after that, he was a chapter president, sang in the bass section, and was a very intelligent man, an engineer, one of the GE transplants that came in, and he realized right off the bat what our problem was. And he took it upon himself. We didn't even know about it until it was practically almost game day, so to speak. But he took it on himself. He formed a little committee, and they took access to the attendance reports. And if they had run into a situation where there was some repeating absentees, I've already talked about the person, you know, primarily, but anybody that was missing some more than one or two rehearsals, you know. This was about 4 or 5 guys, and they would go to the guy privately. It would be on an off night. It wouldn't be on a meeting night. And they'd contact him by phone. Might go to see him, and their approach was very, very low key and very, very very nice. That Joe, we're really going after this thing hard, and we really need you to keep this thing going. And but everybody is putting a maximum effort into this, and if you feel like maybe you can't go along with us on this maximum effort, maybe you ought to just drop out of this thing. And I tell you what, it must have been like a smack of cold water in the face, because it really solved the problem, and many problems after that, for that matter. But it really solved the problem for that thing, and we had a tremendous attendance record. I believe that if I really got back and dug into the record books, which I detest doing, I think one time we found out that if we had if we had during the last 120 days, last 4 months of a contest preparation, if we had attendance of less than, if we had more than 6% absenteeism, we got beat. And if we had less than 6% absenteeism, we won the ball game. And so, if you just deal with numbers, I mean, that tells you something.
Yeah.
And because when you're singing on that level, I mean, everybody's singing in tune, and everybody's matching vowels pretty good, and everybody's balancing chords, and everybody has pretty good vehicles to sing and everything like that. So they get into the little things.
Sure.
When you start separating them up on that level. And so that's what I thought was a sidelight that was very important, and it came right out of the internal part of the membership. We never knew a thing about it. It just took place. And the way I found out about it, as a matter of fact, is one guy came and grumbled about the thing. He said, well, I was sitting at home, and some guys come in to see me, and the next thing you know, they're browbeating me and threatening me with this and threatening me. I said, wait a minute, tell me what's going on here. I found out that the threatening was not a threat at all. Just if you just don't feel like you can do this with us, well, just drop out for a couple of months or something like that. And so he finally calmed down. But that's the way we heard about it, was one guy talked about it. So it was really important. And looking back on the thing, that was I think the number one characteristic of the chapter back in those glory days is the internal leadership. And it came from almost everybody up there, whether it was just to get a guy straightened out in a little bit of a piece of choreography, or whether to tell him he was not quite up on top of a note, or whatever it might be. The guys that were dishing out the help must have done it in a pretty good way, because I never heard anybody there that said that they really resented it, And of course, the thing about it is, if a guy that's got 4 or 5 of those chorus medals said something to you, you probably wouldn't dispute him any more than you would dispute a batting tip from Ted Williams,
Right.
And so that was part of the great things that were happening back in those days. And getting back to the contest itself.
Jim, before you go there, go sideways again a little bit, because you opened the door on that internal leadership. So let's talk a little bit about how the Citations and the Bluegrass Student Union were working with you in that day as far as musically internal.
Yeah.
Because you had a lot of that too, not only from a administrative standpoint, but you had an awful lot of musical expertise working with the men.
Oh, there's no question about that. The Citations were actually designated as associate directors and not section leaders, which a lot of people talked about. The Bluegrass Student Union was pretty much the same type of designation, insofar that in most ensembles, they have what they call a section leader. You do that in any music organization, I'm sure of that. Whether it's a band or whatever, there are people that are in charge of the section. And usually that person is limited right at working with that group of people. The big difference it was with our guys is that they were all had not just the opportunity, but the authority to work with anything and anybody. In other words, if Bill Myers, the consummate bass singer, heard something happening in a lead section or in a tenor section or wherever, he had no qualms about going right in there and working on it. And so he wasn't the bass section leader and stayed there. He worked anywhere, and that was with all of those guys. And I can't claim any credit for anything. It's just that each one of them fell into their own little niche of expertise. Bluegrass Student Union, Rick Stabb was kind of a passive member of the group. He generally worked when somebody asked him about something, you know. Danny Burgess was somewhere in between. Danny Burgess was a newscaster at the time on WHS radio, and he had some rough times in making things happen because of his nightly newscast. But he was very active on his thing. Kenny Hatton was by far the most active of that four, and Alan was actually composed a couple of songs that we used at one time, another. So all of that. Netherton and Buckner and Myers were real workhorses. And if you want a little bit of vanity here, I really believe that we had our shot. In citations, I believe we had our shot to win that thing in the early 70s and back in 72. And the fact was we just, due to our choral duties, we just didn't quite have enough time to take that last big step that you have to take, you know, in the way of rehearsals and mental commitment and everything like that. And none of us regret that. None of us take any issue with that. That's what the plan was with the quartet all along. And so we were very, very fortunate with that kind of situation. One or two times when there became a little resentment that came up about those guys, we didn't take it too lightly. That's not something to be dwelt on, but there were problems that had to be ironed out. But the big thing about that group wasn't so much, well, it was the active, their activities during rehearsals were very, 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 very important. But the big thing about that group was the pre-planning and the execution of the plan, Gentry's plan, and the craft and everything like that, and the knowledge. When we went into a chorus meeting, to a rehearsal, everybody really knew what they wanted to do, and were very, very efficient about doing it. All of our interpretive plans, choreography, and everything like that were pretty much talked about ahead of time, and only when we needed a specialist did we bring in people, which was quite frequently. Choreography-wise, we bring in whoever we had to bring in. The big deal in 70, I beg your pardon, in 81, we had a college band guy come in and set up that drill that we did. And he had to put an awful lot of things into 16 measures, and which he did very, very well. We utilized society people a great deal. But always behind everything was the plan that Gentry came up with, and that was the thing that we really tried to execute. Did I answer that like that? Or
You did. Yeah, you did. Wonderfully. This is a tough one because it requires you to be outside yourself, looking at yourself, and sometimes that's hard to do. That all sounds and was so magnificent that these 8 men, basically the Bluegrass, or 7 other than you, with the citations, the Bluegrass, are working with Ed Gentry, and the plan comes together and everybody's working like clockwork almost. And yet, it's been my experience in any organization, where it be a barbershop course or a church meeting, that those things don't run that smoothly by themselves. So my question here, and we need a little bit of information about that, obviously you were the one who was making this thing work. How did you do that? How did you take all these personalities and these egos that are commensurate with people who are as talented as these men were, and make it work.
Well, there's a couple of egos involved there. There's no question about that. I just never ever gave that, what you just said, a whole lot of thought. Actually, through the help with all these guys who transferred all of this knowledge and enthusiasm and everything to the troops themselves, and in encouraging them and actually insisting on their grasping the thing, accepting the plan, and mastering the plan. I don't know. I took it upon myself to possibly know what that plan was and to know what that procedure was of that thing that Gentry came up with, that I knew it better than anybody. I know that. I don't know how this will sound to you, but I had quite a bit of experience on dealing with bigger groups, not singing group, but with football. I mean, coaching a football team is a similar situation.
Sure.
At least I made it a similar situation, and so there's certain things that you do, certain things you can get by with, certain things you can stay away from that I guess maybe helped out a lot. But I really think if I had to put it all on one thing, I think that, and I don't want this to sound maybe pat me on the back deal or anything, but I have a theory that to be successful in an endeavor like this, really on any endeavor that involves artistry as well as craft, that the person involved has to have a passion for it. And I believe that a music director of any kind, I like to think in particular of a barbershop chapter, of a barbershop ensemble, I believe has to have passion for all music. All music in general, he must have a passion for it. Music he's performing has to be a particular, fierce passion for that music. And that goes over and beyond knowing how to sing or to lock a chord or anything like that. I think I know that I have a passion for music. I mean, I can hear a street beat of a 5 or 6 drummers doing a street beat and bawl like a baby. So I believe that is one of the things that helped bring it together. If I had anything to do with it, it was along those lines. I looked at the barbershop craft as a gathering of a bunch of tools that to be used for artistic, emotional, aesthetic things. And I tried to be as prepared as I possibly could to use whatever those tools that I had available to me in the interpretation of music. And I think probably that I made demands on them physically that they possibly didn't know they could do. I believe that I don't know how to expand on it anymore than that.
You've done great. Let me ask you a situation. You're directing a contest song, something that you're heavily involved in, the chorus is involved in, and the baritones are having problems, and let's say that Ken Buckner or Danny Burgess, one or the other, or both, recognize the problem. How would that happen in a rehearsal? Would Ken step out immediately and interrupt what you're doing, or would I'm just looking for a little bit of maybe logistics here.
They had the authority to step out of rehearsal and stop rehearsal at any one time to do this. The only thing about it is that I did have one rule, and the rule was is that they could stop a rehearsal and they could work on any one thing, but to never criticize or to never make any comments on any unit smaller than the entire section. What I'm seeing is that they can never come out and say, Troy, you're flattening the note, or Troy, this is what you got to do. I mean, they could only talk to the baritone section, and I would never talk to anybody in the chorus individually or call down anybody individually. Might commend somebody, but we never call somebody. Now, what would happen then if they would just take the guy aside and out of earshot of anybody else, they talk to him, but never criticized in any unit smaller than the entire section. In other words, if Troy Lovett was messing things up in the baritone section, I mean, we jump on a whole section.
Yeah.
And then talk.
Yeah.
And I think that was probably. I think you could get a lot tougher on them that way and get by with it.
And from a football standpoint or athletic standpoint, there's always a guy you can kick and another guy you can't ever say anything to, and you sometimes go to the guy that can't take it through the guy that can take it and make the message clear.
Well, I never was that good. You know, I really no kidding. I never was at that. I wasn't that astute.
Able to discern.
Yeah, and they hit more than that.
Well, let me ask you a question that would be amiss for all barbershoppers everywhere. The question that's always asked in every year every course that I've ever been a part of, and that's riser discipline. That expression has been maybe overworked, overused, and seem like champions have better riser discipline than non-champions. So how were the Thoroughbreds in 1978?
Well, I don't think that you could ever say that any time I was with the Thoroughbreds that we had very good riser discipline. I'm going to qualify that by making a definition of what I call riser discipline. Some chapters and some courses, and even to this day, or right now, especially some of the real good ones, we're very proud of the fact that, when there was never a word uttered. You don't speak about anything. I mean, you get instruction from the front and you do it, but never any conversation or anything like that. I really couldn't adhere to that. I always kind of thought that it had to be some fun involved, and then in which case you could push them as hard. You push them as hard as you want, as long as they can have a little fun. Now, I consider we had probably better riser discipline than most because of the definition. I don't define riser discipline by being quiet on the risers and paying solid attention to everything like that. That's not to me. If I wanted attention, I figure I could yell louder than anybody that was up there talking. The thing that I considered riser discipline was the guy that was disciplined, that he came fully prepared to know what he was doing, that he worked hard on his craft, that he did the things that made the sound. That's what I call a guy that was disciplined, that knew what he was doing, had done his homework, and not just being anybody can just stand up or not make any noise at all and just stand there. I mean, that doesn't take any talent. So we were, I guess you'd call, a fairly loose group as far as making noise on the risers concerned. To get things started, in some chapters all you have to do is either have a little sound on a pitch pipe or director hold up his hand and everything goes like so. Well, it wasn't like that with the Thoroughbreds. I mean, it was really pretty loose. I think that one of the things that comes to mind about a person made a comment about one time was about getting on and off the risers, and there's some very complicated, not complicated, but complex ways. You know, everybody lines up in the rows, and you know, when they walk up there, and this and that and the other thing. And with us, it was pretty much a, hey, get up on the steps, you know. And there was a big column of mobs and everything like that, but everybody got there, and they knew where they were supposed to be, and maybe somebody in the in the second row, you know, they grab her, put their hands on the right hand on the left shoulder here, and the left hand on the shoulder there, and shake around and line up, and it'd be lined up in the windows, and that just seemed to work a whole lot better. I mean, for me anyway. I don't know what I'd have been able to do if I walked in there and it was just complete silence, you know. So, like, you know, I guess that is one of the indications of, you know, inadequacies as far as that's concerned. But I just, it just had to be some fun. And you know, if you really bust one, I mean, you really get one locked up in a big tag, have that baby scorching and peeling paint, you know, and you don't want them to say anything about something like that. Couldn't understand that.
Yeah.
Talk that baby over. Yeah. Let that thing, everybody soak it in, you know. Yeah. And so that was generally the way the thought was. Now, there were always some times when, you know, it would get a little bit out of hand. But when it did, one of those eight guys, or Herb Humphreys or somebody, would quiet it down. Hawkins was the guy that, I mean, he was only with us in the later part, but he was a big one on that. And of course, he came right out of that music school, you know, and everything. And, but there were so many people like that I learned so much from, though. Particularly in the later part, after Gentry's part had been pretty much absorbed. I really started to learn things from guys like Hawkins and Bob Muka. When I was at Cincinnati, I learned so much from Bob Muka that you wouldn't, you know, he always said it was about even, you know. But that was a great relationship up there. And he was what 8 guys were for me in Louisville. Bob Muka was up in Cincinnati. I don't want to digress into that, but I really felt that it had to be a lot of fun, and if a guy couldn't celebrate a real scorching piece of business, you know, why, you know, what was he there for?
Absolutely.
I guess it's actually a misnomer. I actually detest all the stuff that goes on in sports right now, you know, the dancing around the end zones and banging on your chest and jumping up and hitting one. I really don't like to see that very much, but I guess this is the same thing I'm talking about happening. You know.
Yeah, I don't know. I agree with you. So the preparation then, what as far as the contest songs in '78, had you sung those in '77, or did you get a new package for '78? What was the thinking there?
We got a whole new package, and you know, in '74 we had this package of that had been arranged for us by Renee Craig, and she did one of the songs. Excuse me. She did one of the songs, arranged one of the songs that we used in 1978, and it was a medley of songs. Put On Your Old Gray Bonnet, and another similar song, Put On Your Old Gray Bonnet, with the blue ribbon on it, and then it was Put On Your Gingham Gown, Dear. I can't think what the exact number of the name of the song was, but it was a similar song that fit right in with Put On Your Old Gray Bonnet. And and she did the arrangement of that song. And the ballad that we used was a song called "The Sunshine of Your Smile," and it was arranged by Willis Deekema. He was a great friend of the chapter and of the Citations, And he's the composer and arranger, of course, the Society theme song, Keep America Singing. And he had arranged this song, and it had been used in a championship quartet situation with the Confederates back in the late 50s. And we took that song, and Ed Gentry then adapted it a little bit. Deacoma had a habit or a temptation or whatever you want to call it, the end of a phrase, just to repeat to the end of a phrase. Tell me that I love you, you know, at the end of a phrase, or that type of thing. He had a tendency to do that. And by 1978, that was, you know, a little bit passé. So Gentry changed a couple of chords and smoothed out a couple of little things, and changed the arrangement around. Didn't change it very much, but just cleaned up some phrase endings and things like that, and that's what we used in the thing. It's a powerful song. Give me your smile, the sunshine of your smile. It was a very powerful song with a big resounding tag on the end of it. And, well, you've heard it. And I will tell you a little sidelight that you can cut this out if you want to. I don't know whether you want to keep this or not.
No, we want to.
There's a passage in this song, Sunshine of Your Smile. It's kind of a weird little interview in there that ties the whole thing together. And in this song was in this interlude, there was a passing chord. It was just a quarter note. And we syncopated it a little bit, so it didn't actually last that long, but it was just quarter note. And it was a weird thing. What you could get by with as long as it was a passing thing. You didn't dwell on it or anything, but it was one of these chords that you use to get from this chord to this chord, and it was kind of empty sounding. It didn't, let's just get through this thing quick, and everything. And one time we were singing, and boy, all of a sudden, ooh, that thing sounded so rich. And matter of fact, it sounded so rich and so everything that I was, actually changed the interpretation a little bit. Instead of taking it away from being an eighth note, I gave it a full quarter note, value on this thing, because it's so. Oh, behold, I find out, Gentry and Buckner and a couple of other ones were chuckling over this whole thing, and I find out that in the middle of this chord where it was kind of empty, they put a fifth note in there. They doubled a note, what they did. They doubled up a note. I think that's what they did. But anyway, they had a fifth voice going in there. And it just made that thing so full it wasn't even funny, And so Gentry said to me, he said, "You remember you didn't hear that?" And I said, "No, I didn't hear that fifth voice in there." And he said, I said, "All I heard was the chord." And he said, "Well, this is illegal. We can't do anything like this." But anyway, it just kept going on and on and on. And we decided to leave it there. Leave it there. And so, but we tested it. Everybody that came across the thing, I'd ask them directly, "Did you hear this little passage in there? That sound all right to you?" "Oh yeah, like that passage." And I'm talking about learned people. I'm not talking about Joe Blow that and so we're in the ready room at Cincinnati. We've already been to the warm-up room. We're in the ready to go on the stage. And no, I take it back. We still could do some singing. And we'd already checked it out again right then, and everything. And a fellow named Walter Latsko came in. Now, I want to qualify this. Walter Latsko was a member of the society, but general music man that had written and arranged music for all kinds of orchestral stuff. I mean, he wasn't just a barbershop arranger. I mean, this guy was a big-time guy. He arranged stuff for the Buffalo Bills, had arranged for orchestras and everything at the New York level, and but he's also a barbershopper. And I think his big thing. His wife, as a matter of fact, was a tenor singer. The second tenor singer for the Quartets, who, you know, the Arthur Godfrey group that was there, and so this guy really knew his onions, and he came in there, and we ran this thing by him, you know, and I didn't ask him or anything. We just kind of run by, and he came to me. He says, "You got a fifth note in there." And I said, "No, we don't have any fifth note." "Yeah, you got a fifth note in there." He said, "You better check somebody singing another note in there." And I says, "Well, where exactly are you talking about?" And he picked it right out, you know. And I said, "Walter, you don't have any, you can't possibly hear that fifth note in there." "I don't hear the fifth note." He says, "There's an overtone in there that shouldn't be there. You just get that?" Man, I'm dumbfounded. He heard an overtone that wasn't supposed to be there, but over a chord just went boom, 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 like that. And he said there was a fifth note. And he says the only way that overtone can be in that position is a chord has to be hit there. A fundamental has to be there. And, oh, mercy, this guy's a judge and everything, see? And I said, "Well, Walter, you know, it just so happens that we do have 2 or 3 people saying that." I says, "Boy, are you gonna do anything about this?" He said, "Oh," he said, "I'm not judging this contest." He says, "I'm just a spectator." So that was a story I really like to tell.
Oh, that's great.
The astuteness of that guy could pick something out where a chorus of 100 guys, and he had 3 voices singing this note, and he picked it out.
Oh boy! Oh boy!
Yeah.
Let me ask you, in the later days, and I'm sure, assuming that this was true in '78, we always got preliminary scores in the district competition and stuff. So, did you have? I'm trying to set the stage for the vocal majority and you all in Cincinnati. So, did you feel at that time, or did you have an awareness of where you were in relation to them, or did that go on in those days?
You know, you really didn't think much about that, Troy, in those days. Big thing was that generally by the time you got to the international 9 months later, you had a completely different chorus.
Okay.
And it's the same thing. That same condition exists today, but
they make a lot out of it, don't they?
I think that they make a lot out of it, and I think that is a black mark on the judging system.
I do too.
Back in the other day, they judged that contest.
Yeah.
Right then and there. They didn't judge anything that took place a year before or 9 months before or anything like that. What took place on this stage right now was a quality that that judging panel had, and that's what we depend on. We never worried too much about that.
I think you're exactly right.
But as of right now, these groups right now, and
they're already lining up.
They line up, and you know, that's with and I think it's very much more. I think the Sweet Adeline judges depend so much more on it. See, the guys now they've got the right kind of thing going with them. They always, when there were 5 categories and 4 categories, they always had 3 panels, and you know, judging, and that would be 15 judges, or 12 judges, and whatever the case may be. Now that there's only 3 categories, they have 5 panels, and to me, I think that's the greatest thing in the world, because you've got judges judging. They better judge themselves, a little bit, and before they go off on some tangent or crazy thing.
Yeah.
And but now the Sweet Adelines, they still they still in a preliminary contest. They have one set of judges, and I think at the international level they only have two sets of judges. You know, but
Yeah.
but they depend more so than the guys. But the guys themselves are also into that stuff now. And right with this local chapter with Kathy and Christina right now. I mean, they're sitting in with only a couple of choruses that in the whole world that's got ahead of them. You know.
Yeah.
And they're dependent a lot on that. I don't know.
Yeah.
But,
Well,
okay, I guess we get back to this contest.
yeah, we'll get there. How did you get to Cincinnati? Being so close, did you bus up there, or did everybody just show up on their own? How did you do that?
Yeah, well, we never ever utilized the convention time for rehearsal purposes. I mean, we rehearsed on a Monday night, and the convention taking place that week, guys got there on their own. Some guys might make arrangements to go in a group or something like that, but they went there on their own. And their first rehearsal, the first formation that they would meet as thoroughbreds would be after the quartet semifinals on Friday night. When that quartet contest was over on Friday night, which is usually around 11 o'clock, and then they would meet in the room that we had set aside, and that room traditionally then became a pretty good sized room because people from all over the country would slip in there for that final thoroughbred rehearsal. I mean, we had more brass in there than you could find in a foundry. I mean, would come in there. Nobody wanted to see it and to be seen at that thing, and that's when they were first time that they were doing. Any other time they didn't have to be there if they want to, if they didn't want to. But about 11:30 at night, the first time so how they got there was was on their own, and that rehearsal was one preliminary run through this to kind of get loosened up a little bit, and then run it through the second time full bore, and that was it. And right now, I mean, I'm just completely astounded. I mean, choruses show up on Monday or Tuesday and work for 4 and 5, 6, 8 hours a day.
Yeah, that should be.
And it's the same old story that when we're doing football. I mean, if you haven't got it on game day, you're not going to get it then.
No.
In the same way, if you don't have it by the time you get to the convention, you're not going to find it there at the convention. And I guess that maybe it's a little crazy to say on something like that, but I just never could see that.
Yeah.
And everybody kind of agreed with, the whole team kind of agreed with that. I mean, well, they had to, but it was with the way we did it. There were things that took place, administrative things like travel funds and things like that were distributed. And I tell you the truth, I don't know whether I'd be good to try to tell you about them or not. I really don't know how they took place. And but they always were some. I know how some of the early ones took place. Some of the early ones took place, but everybody in the chorus would borrow the money and everybody signed for it. And later on, I don't, I'm not exactly sure. Most of the, I know we sang 10 to 12 shows a year for conventions and other chapters and things like that. And all of that money was generally allotted to, to go to conventions. But I don't know how they did it.
And I've got to ask you a story that I've heard and actually repeated and been told I wasn't exactly getting it right, so I want to get it right straight from the source here. That before this contest in 1978, someone who represented Dallas, or who at least had an affinity for Dallas, made a bet with you, or at least tried to make a bet, and I'd kind of like to hear that story, and I know everyone else would.
Well, you got a couple of things wrong.
Okay.
the guy was Bill McDonald. Actually, it wasn't in that was the very first contest they were in. It was in '74, okay. And he was the chapter convention guy. And I was doing a school at the Kenosha chapter. I was up there doing a weekend school for the Kenosha chapter. And when the school was over on Saturday night, we were taken to dinner, and after dinner, the dinner involved their chapter we call it inauguration night.
Installation.
Sending selected officers and everything were sworn in or whatever you do to them. And so after that was over with, there were several of us that were invited to one of the homes for some just, kind of an after thing, And Bob Johnson, he was the music guy was there, and Rosemary and I were there. And no, Rosemary wasn't along. And some chapter officials from the Kenosha chapter and some society people, and Bill McDonald was one of them. And the thing came, this was in January, and the thing came up about the chorus contest, and how you going to do. Well, we're working on it and everything, what you normally would say. And the thing came up about that new group down in Dallas. And Bill McDonald said, well, the contest is over. He said, these guys are going to win this contest hands down. And he says, they're just absolutely fantastic. And I'm sitting there, okay, I can't, I'm in a strange house, and, everything. I'm just kind of sitting there and everything. And finally somebody, what do you think about that, Jim? And I said, well, I just don't know that anybody can do a good job of picking out a winner in January. It says in July is when they're going to find out who won that thing. And but then he really got off on it and really was saying how this is dead mortal lock. And I'm getting steamed a little bit by this time, And so he said, they're just too good. They're going to beat everybody. And I said, well, he says, I would bet anything that they're going to win this contest. And I said, well, wait a minute here. I said, what do you want to bet? He says, anything you want. I said, well, how about your house against my house? And, he says, I don't want to be silly about this thing. I said, I'm not being silly. I said, we decided on a $10 bet. And of course, we won the contest, and I never did get that $10. But that's the way it took place. And it was in '74. And when they say Dallas came in third, they were actually only like 3 or 4 points out of first, though.
They're very close.
Yeah. And
so let's talk a little bit. We may have to change our tape here in 5 minutes or so. But what do you remember before you went out? What position did you sing in '78? Do you remember that? As to
no.
Any thoughts about right before the actual performance?
Yeah, a couple of things. The one thing I told you about was the thing with Let's Go that took place, and that for some reason, and I don't really know why. Usually it's kind of a little edgy before a contest, and everything, and I used to just kind of be up on the tippy toes a little bit, I found myself at this contest. And it's strange that you mentioned this, because this was a little bit of difference. I found myself way off to the side, and I found myself going mentally, all of a sudden going through every move. I mean, walking on stage and every interpretive plan, everything was going through my mind. And that didn't normally take place like that. I found that happening, and I found myself. This is crazy. I'm going through the moves and everything. Another time, I found myself saying the Hail Mary, and so that things like that were different for me. Normally. I was pretty much attentive to everything, but this time I found myself really working hard on pre-planning, going through the moves. I don't mean the choreography moves, but I'm talking about the musical moves prior to the contest more than usual. Another thing happened. Usually we didn't have everybody going to a shell, and I find that our chapter president at the time, and while I'm kind of off by myself, I found he had everybody else all calm down. Nobody say anything and they're talking in tones like this and everything. And that's when it dawned on me what I was doing. And I said, well, we can't have this. And so we kind of loosened up after that a little bit. Oh boy, when that curtain opened and the song starts off with like gangbusters. I mean, it starts off with the full bore, "Give me your smile," and bass making boom, 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 boy, everything like so, and right prior to that, we always had a very simple stage thing. When the curtain opened, I was generally standing in the middle and would take strides to the front to take a bow, and everything. And the judges would be in the pit down there, and as the curtain would rise, it was a planned thing. It was rehearsed. Everybody in the chorus would be drilling right into those in that judging pit, right at them. Boy, I mean, as strong up, smiling right at that judge. And as the curtain rose, and right there at that guy, and then gradually came up and accepted, accepted the audience. And at this time, by the time I got the drill over and I was eating up its head off, man, I swear I could feel it coming, hitting me right in the back. I could feel it. Those guys were putting out such stuff back there and hadn't sung a note yet, I don't know, that's hard for anybody to understand. And it didn't happen all the time. But boy, that's one time it did, boy. I mean, I'd turn around there and look there and I could feel like somebody was banging on my neck. And then that first chord hit. Man, I said to myself, the boat has sailed, man, we're gone.
That's what I've heard.
Yeah.
Al Dittmer.
As a matter of fact, when that was over with, and to this day, Jim Clancy will tell you that was the turning point for the vocal majority. And they finally found out that what had to be done. That it had to be done with emotion as well as craft. And he'll tell you that today. And that's pretty much, in addition to the things that you brought up earlier about the old school and the new school.
Yeah.
Because the vocal majority after that became the masters at being able to have this fantastic technique that they had, and mixed in, the emotion and the drive, and that was the last time the Thoroughbreds ever went up against those two times are the only time the Thoroughbreds ever went up against the vocal majority and beat them both times.
Yeah, yeah.
Now I went up against them and then I with Cincinnati and I split with them too, but I mean I got beat by them with Cincinnati at one time when I thought we beat them
here in Louisville. I think it was, wasn't it?
I thought we won that contest. But they didn't give it to us.
I remember that. Al Dittmer, our colleague and friend, was sitting in the audience that day in '78, and he's told me privately, and maybe have told you, that that the contest was over, basically, on that first, when the curtain opened, and just what you've described so well, it was just so overwhelming, the energy that he felt as a person in the audience.
Well, they up at Cincinnati, they'd gotten pretty good at it, but they were neither as tough. They weren't as tough as the guys in Louisville. They were a little bit better singers up there and everything, but they weren't as tough. And greatest bunch of guys in the world, but you know, they did it that one time, and after that was enough for them. You know.
Yeah. Well, let's pause a minute, and we'll take a break here.